Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt inside the ReliefFactor.com studio, inside of the Beltway. Back in the days when Dennis DeYoung and I were out there on the circuit, Mike Gallagher would play the air guitar to this. I play it today. Just to remind you, April 27th to May 7th is our cruise to Normandy. If you want information, go to hughcruise.com. Mike Gallagher, of course, is the Patriot Mobile Member of the Week, the Congressman extraordinaire from the north of Wisconsin. But 4 years ago, before he had begun his astonishing ascent in Congress, he was an aide to then Governor Scott Walker running for president, helping him prep for debates. So actually, while I'll get to foreign affairs in just a second and military matters, Congressman Gallagher, will you take us back to those days 4 years ago when you were trying to prep Scott Walker for the debates? What did you do right and wrong as a team to get ready for what became ultimately a two-debate series for Scott Walker?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, and I love the Styx music as a lead-in. I went through a big Styx revival when I was in high school, so I appreciate that.
I know the air guitar film's out there. I've seen it. It's not very. You don't want to have it released, but I've seen it.
That's the least incriminating film of me from my younger years that's out there. So I actually thought we had a pretty robust debate prep. We did a few mock debates. I remember I actually played Marco Rubio in the debates, and we had a variety of people that played various competitors, and we did a full-on simulation with the governor, which I thought was very helpful, and it was helpful for us to try and crank up the pressure in that environment so he was ready for the big stage. But I think the challenge for him, and I think the challenge will be even greater for any of the Democratic candidates, is just the sheer size of the debate stage. Even with them breaking it down into two different nights, it's going to be hard to get noticed. And so I think this will create a bizarre pressure to have a viral moment. And if people overplay their hand in that respect, I think they're just going to look foolish. So I think the important thing, at least when it comes to foreign policy, which is what I did on the campaign trail, is to remember that this is what's called the commander-in-chief test. And it's really a pass-fail endeavor. You don't need to hit a grand slam. You don't need to knock out of the park. You just need to give the American people a sense that you can put a steady hand on the wheel when it comes to navigating rough geopolitical waters.
I was talking with Dan Balls at the first segment of this hour. I went back and watched the beginning of the first debate, which was in Cleveland at the Q, before thousands of cheering people with Brett Baer and Chris Wallace and Megyn Kelly. And there were 10 Republicans up there for the primetime debate. The first question was a raise your hand question. And I hate raise your hand questions. And Brett said it'll be the only one. But he said, will you raise your hand if you will refuse to commit to support the Republican nominee and forswear an independent campaign for the president? And only Donald Trump put his hand up, and the campaign changed. One question, not about substance, about process, and about and the president, then candidate Trump, took advantage to stand apart from everyone else. Did you see that coming, Mike Gallagher?
I did not see that coming at all. I mean, these debates have very unpredictable moments like this. You know, it's funny, Hugh, also, maybe this contradicts what I just said earlier, but we did write a pretty good line that the governor deployed, or I think maybe he just thought of it on his own, that got a lot of attention in that first debate, where he said something to the effect of Russia and China know more about Hillary Clinton's emails than the United States Congress. And that was really kind of his biggest moment in that debate. And so, you know, a well-timed line that is well deployed can be effective in these debates. But again, I just sense that a lot of the Democratic candidates are going to be going overboard with this stuff. Their rhetoric so far has been totally overboard. And I get it. It's a crowded primary. You got to raise money and get attention. But, you know, you're undercutting your long-term argument with the American people, who I think don't respond well to histrionics.
Now, I want to switch to the border. On the cover of the print edition of the New York Times is a terrible photo. It's the bodies of Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez and his daughter, 23-month-old Valeria, who died and drowned while trying to cross the Rio Grande this week. The Times has put it on the front page. I've been asking people whether NBC would put that photo up and ask the candidates to respond. I had on Alex Azar yesterday. He thought coverage of the border had been scurrilous by the news media, that it made contractors less likely to work with our people, that we're doing the best we can, but that their numbers are overwhelming. What's your assessment, not of the photo in particular, unless you'd like to address it, but just generally the nightmare at the border that is, in fact, the result of not having secured it over many years?
Well, the photo is truly tragic, and heartbreaking, as is the broader situation on the border. And I think there's a tendency for people to think that those calling for aggressive border enforcement are heartless. But I just would argue that continuing the status quo of a porous border and inviting people to risk their lives and their children's lives in order to take advantage of our asylum laws comes with a huge cost as well. Doing nothing comes with an enormous cost. And what we saw yesterday in the House of Representatives was a purely partisan exercise by the Democrats, which would actually not fix the problem at the border. In fact, it would take away the $61 million for military personnel assisting in this crisis. So whether or not you agree that the military should be down at the border, I think we should all agree that those there doing that work should get paid. And the bill also didn't address the root problems. It was a Band-Aid. The money was less than half the money we spent on Coast Guard cutters to interdict drugs in the Caribbean. It takes away a lot of resources for the immigration court system in particular. It did not provide the resources necessary for more immigration judge teams, courtrooms, and equipment. And it also restricted DHS's ability to detail employees to address surges along the border and didn't include any funding for ICE pay, shortfalls, or overtime. So it's regrettable that we've come to this partisan moment when it comes to border security. I actually think there remains a deal on the table if people can calm down a little bit and get out of the presidential election mode of doing robust border security for some action on DACA. Remember, the deal that almost got passed in the last Congress was $25 billion for border security in return for action on DACA. That strikes me as the most obvious first step forward that may allow us to get some momentum to address the bigger, longer-term problems with our immigration system.
Now, Congressman Gallagher, does the House-passed appropriation go to conference with the Senate now? And if so, is there an upper limit on aid and the ability to fashion a package? Are they cabined by the language of the two bills?
I believe that they're not. In other words, the Senate bill is more bipartisan. It has less restrictions, and I think is what will the final product will look much more like the Senate bill. The question is more a political one. It's if what comes out of conference back to the House is identical or substantially similar to the Senate provision, is it enough for Republicans, and is it too much for progressive Democrats? Because I think the biggest and underreported story is just how challenging it's been for Pelosi to keep a handle on her caucus, who wants to go in a far more extreme direction on this issue. So we'll see what comes out of conference. I suspect they will try and keep this to the last second and then jam everyone, as they do with all issues, but I suspect it will look far more like the Senate construct than the House construct.
All right, now I want to switch over to the People's Republic of China because Secretary Mnuchin says we are 90% of the way to a deal. Markets are responding well. The president's going to meet President Xi in Osaka, Japan this weekend. But in the national interest, Robert Kaplan, a very serious foreign affairs thinker, has a new piece, America Must Prepare for the Coming Chinese Empire, and he will be joining me next hour. I don't blink at the idea of empire. That's what the Soviet Union had. We're not empire builders, but there have been empires in the past, and I think that's what they're looking for with Belt and Road. What do you think?
Well, I think what Kaplan's work here and his previous work really draws out, which is essential to understanding how we win this competition for empire, is that this is primarily going to be a naval competition. I mean, Kaplan has talked perhaps more elegantly than anyone, with the exception of Stavridis and some others, about how important navies will be in the future of competition and in preventing the Chinese from realizing their empire. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is explicit in terms of what they want their region to look like over the next 20 to 50 years. And it does not allow the United States to remain its current presence. What they're doing is militarizing the South and East China Sea. It's just a prelude to a broader model whereby they hope to push us back to Hawaii and perhaps allow us to remain there. And what they're doing in Xinjiang province with over 1 million Uyghur Muslims locked in concentration camps, they're perfecting a ruthless digital surveillance state that will not remain confined in Xinjiang. They will also deploy it perhaps a little bit more benignly on their own citizens, but ultimately export it around the world. So we have to be clear-eyed about this. One thing this week, Hugh, that I think has not gotten the notice it deserves is that Chinese Communist Party officials declared they will not allow the G20 to discuss Hong Kong. So this just goes to show they are terrified of being embarrassed in a global forum. And you know what? They should be. human rights are a universal language that threatens their legitimacy at home and abroad. And beyond the fact that we now obviously have to bring up Hong Kong at every opportunity at the G20 this week, we should think more broadly about elevating human rights as a third pillar of our relationship with the Chinese next to defense and economics. Go back to Reagan, Hugh. I mean, Reed Schultz's preparation for Reagan prior to him going to the Moscow State speech in 1988, his last of 4 meetings with Gorbachev, the first item on the list that he asked Reagan to bring up is human rights, and indeed Reagan did.
Now, very quickly, Robert Kaplan writes, in functional and historical terms, this will be an imperial struggle, though our elites, both inside and outside government, will forbid the use of the term. The Chinese will have an advantage in this type of competition as they have a greater tradition in empire building than we do, and they are not ashamed of it as we have become. Moreover, the Chinese have demonstrated an ability to quickly adapt, which is the key to Darwinian evolution. The continual changes they are making to their Belt and Road model are an example of this. The Chinese also have more capable leadership than we do. 30 seconds, Mike Gallagher. Pretty astonishing assertions.
The Chinese have the advantage of thinking on longer time horizons, while we are beset by 2-year and 4-year political cycles, no doubt. We need to recover a long-term perspective. Ultimately, our advantage lies in the fact, however, that China has a history in what they call barbarian handling. They do not want allies and partners. They want servants and vassal states. And that is where we have an advantage, and we need to send that message around the world, reinforce, rebuild, and extend our network of alliances and partners.
Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure, Congressman. We will be talking with Robert Kaplan next hour. I appreciate it. The Patriot Mobile member of the week, as he always is.